Have you ever heard a story so filled with devotion, heartbreak, and unwavering hope that you find yourself at the edge of your seat, heart pounding with anticipation for what's to come? Well, brace yourself, because the journey you're about to embark on will grip your emotions, tug at your heartstrings, and ultimately leave you speechless. This is the extraordinary tale of Elanor, a woman who sacrificed everything she had for her family, clinging to hope through the darkest days, never once imagining that life could still hold a surprise for her. What happens on her 70th birthday will melt your heart and remind you that true love can never be extinguished by time or circumstance. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you're new here, please drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if you love your family, make sure you subscribe to this channel and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your support truly means the world to us. Now, get comfortable, settle in, and allow me to share Elanor's remarkable story. It begins long before she turned 70. She was once young, newly married, and filled with hopes and dreams that included beautiful family holidays, laughter echoing through hallways, and a future so bright it felt invincible. Elanor married her high school sweetheart, Martin, at the tender age of 22. They were both college students at the time, struggling financially, but their hearts were bursting with ambition and a certain youthful certainty that love was enough to sustain them. They rented a small one-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. Yet to them, it felt like a palace because they were together. Their neighbors would hear the joyful melodies of a piano drifting through the thin walls. That piano was a gift from Elanor's grandmother, an heirloom that had been in the family for generations. It was scratched up in places, the varnish chipping on the lid, and had a few keys that stuck on rainy days. But to Elanor, it was her treasure. It represented her link to her family's musical tradition, and playing it brought her a sense of comfort no words could describe. Martin, knowing how much it meant to her, often said that as long as that piano was in the house, there would always be magic. Their early years as newlyweds were far from easy, yet the challenges bonded them in ways that only hardship can. Martin worked nights in a factory loading crates, while Elanor waited tables at a local diner in the mornings before attending her classes. They would sit across from each other at the rickety dining table. At odd hours sometimes, dinner for them was at midnight, stealing kisses in between bites of leftover pasta and dreaming about the family they would one day raise. It was during these meager times that Elanor began to develop a fierce resilience. She learned how to budget pennies, how to stretch a small paycheck to buy groceries for the week, and how to get stains out of Martin's work shirts without expensive detergents. Every small victory made her believe she could handle anything. And so, when the children finally came, she was overjoyed. She had 3 in quick succession: 2 boys, Robert and Henry, and then a girl, Beatrice. Their tiny apartment soon overflowed with the chaos of baby bottles, pacifiers, and Martin's attempts to baby-proof every corner. Elanor cut back on her job to stay home during the day, while Martin continued his night shifts. Money was tighter than ever. Still, amidst the confusion and tiredness, they managed to find moments of pure delight, like the nights Martin would rock each child to sleep, while Elanor played lullabies on that old piano. As the children grew, so did the family's expenses. Martin and Elanor decided to buy a modest suburban home, complete with a small front yard where the kids could play. The first time they pulled into the driveway, the children squealed with excitement, and Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She could picture them growing up in that house, bounding down the stairs on Christmas morning, leaving for prom in their best clothes, and eventually stepping out into the world as adults filled with the same hopes and ideals that once fueled her and Martin. The house became a sanctuary of love. They repainted the rooms themselves, often making a mess with paint splatters on the floor and in each other's hair. The piano-chipped lid, and all had a special place in the living room, right by a large window that let in warm sunlight every afternoon. She found herself playing less frequently, given how busy she was, but those rare moments when her fingers touched the keys felt like a balm for her soul. It was as if the melodies were speaking directly to her heart, reminding her of the power of music, love, and perseverance. Tragedy, however, often arrives without warning. Martin had been feeling unwell for months, but brushed off the symptoms as exhaustion. Between the late-night shifts and helping with the kids, He assumed fatigue was normal. Then one morning, he didn't come home from work on time. Elanor was pacing by the window, anxious and certain something was wrong. As the clock ticked on, fear clutched her heart more tightly. The phone call came from the hospital, telling her that Martin had collapsed. By the time Elanor found a neighbor to watch the kids and rushed to the emergency room, Martin was gone. The doctors told her it was a hidden heart condition, a silent killer that gave no obvious warnings until it was too late. Eleanor's world fell apart in that single moment. She stood by Martin's bedside, tears rolling uncontrollably down her cheeks, holding his hand, which was still warm. All their dreams, all the plans they had made, shattered. She felt she couldn't breathe. His absence was an unfillable void, and the mere thought of facing life without him was too much to bear. But there were 3 children at home who needed her more than ever. Her heartbreak and grieving had to be balanced by the urgent demands of motherhood. She couldn't afford to collapse into her own sorrow for too long. She had to keep going, for their sake. The funeral was a blur of condolences, flowers, and neighbors dropping off casseroles at the house. Her oldest son, Robert, was just 11, but he tried to put on a brave face for his younger siblings. Each time she looked into her children's eyes, she saw Martin's memory reflected back at her. She felt a surge of responsibility that both comforted and terrified her. She had to be strong. She had to keep them afloat. The life insurance policy Martin had, though helpful, wasn't enough to sustain them for very long. Elanor found herself in a dire financial situation. 3 kids, a mortgage, bills piling up, and only a waitressing job to support them. Over time, she took on double shifts, sometimes working as a hostess in the evening after her usual morning shift. Sleep became a luxury. She missed countless school plays, parent-teacher conferences, and weekend soccer matches because she was too busy trying to keep the lights on. And whenever guilt gnawed at her, she told herself this was the only way to ensure her children's future. The children learned early how to care for one another in her absence. Robert would help Henry with his homework, and Beatrice, the youngest, would tag along quietly, uncertain how to navigate the situation without a father. When Elanor came home late, she'd find them all sprawled on the couch, textbooks still open on their laps, drifting in and out of sleep. She'd feel a pang of regret, wishing she could be more present. But life had given her no choices, had to fight for their survival. And fight she did. As the years went by, the children became teenagers and then young adults. Elanor worked tirelessly to ensure they had as many opportunities as possible. She sacrificed small luxuries, like getting new clothes for herself, going out to eat, or even heating the house properly during the winter, all so she could save money for their education. It pained her when she had to buy discount bread or skip a meal to make ends meet, but she refused to burden her children with adult worries. By the time her 2 sons entered college pursuing engineering, the other business administration, the financial strain was almost unbearable. Elanor sought additional part-time work, cleaning offices in the early morning hours before heading to her waitressing job. Her body ached, her spirit felt frayed, and her social life was non-existent. But seeing the acceptance letters arrive and hearing her sons talk excitedly about their future confirmed every sacrifice was worth it. The piano gathered dust in the living room. From time to time, Elanor would catch a glimpse of it and feel a swirl of mixed emotions, longing for the solace music once brought her, regret for not having the time or energy to play, and a distant memory of Martin's words about how there would always be magic when that piano was in the house. She tried not to dwell on it. There was no space for nostalgia in her relentless battle to pay the bills. Beatrice, her youngest, followed her brothers to college a few years later. It was around that time that Elanor hit one of her lowest points financially. She juggled multiple jobs, rarely sleeping. Sometimes she'd break down in tears behind the closed door of her bedroom because the stress felt like a crushing weight. She didn't want to lose the house Martin had worked so hard to secure, the place that was supposed to be a haven. If she lost that house, it would feel like losing him all over again. But she pressed on. The children graduated, found decent jobs, and embarked on their own adult lives. For a short period, it seemed like Elanor might finally catch her breath. She even began setting aside a tiny bit of money for repairs around the house, including the piano, which had some broken keys. She thought, Maybe when the kids were settled, she'd have time to rekindle her love for music. She allowed herself that small daydream. However, life had another twist in store. Her granddaughter, Lily, was born with a congenital condition that required surgery. The moment Elanor found out, she was devastated but determined to help. Lily's parents, Henry and his wife, were facing massive medical bills. Elanor could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear she felt years ago when she lost Martin. She couldn't bear the thought of them losing their child simply because they couldn't afford a procedure. Without telling anyone, Elanor made the agonizing decision to sell her beloved piano, the one heirloom she had left from her grandmother. She didn't have enough savings to cover the surgical costs, and the second mortgage she tried to apply for was denied. But she knew a private collector in town who had shown interest in the piano before. She'd always refused his offers, refusing to part with something so precious. But now, she had no choice. The day she watched the collector's moving truck load the piano out of her living room, Elanor felt like a part of her soul was being taken away. She stood by the window, tears streaking her cheeks, recalling how Martin used to rest his hand lovingly on her shoulder while she played. But the sorrow was tempered by the knowledge that Lily's surgery would now be paid for. If saving Lily's life meant losing a piece of her history, she was willing to make that trade. After that, time moved forward in a blur of worry for Lily's health. The surgery was successful, and Lily began a slow but steady recovery. Henry and his wife were beyond grateful. They insisted they would pay Elanor back, but she waved them off. She told them her granddaughter's life and health were the only repayment she would ever need. Then, as life eventually calmed again, Elanor found herself alone in her quiet house. The children were busy with their careers and growing families, scattered across the country. Visits became less frequent. Phone calls dwindled from daily check-ins to sporadic chats. Birthdays and holidays were usually marked by quick phone calls or a flurry of text messages. She understood they had their own responsibilities, just as she did when she was raising them. Yet she couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness creep into her heart. She rarely complained, though. She took on small tasks in the neighborhood, babysitting local kids, helping older neighbors with their errands to keep herself occupied. She tried to find new hobbies, like crocheting, though her arthritic fingers sometimes protested. She read books from the library and listened to music on the old radio Martin bought decades ago. And every evening she'd walk past the empty space in the living room where her piano once stood, and she'd feel a twinge of longing. By the time she turned 70, Elanor genuinely believed her sacrifices were long forgotten. She never expected any grand gestures. Her children were wonderful people, but they had their own lives. She told herself she was content with a simple phone call on her birthday, and, if she was lucky, a visit from whichever child was in town. Deep down, she missed them terribly. She missed the chaos, the laughter, the milestones. She told herself it was the natural order of things. Children leave the nest, and parents must accept it. But acceptance didn't dull the loneliness. She prepared for her 70th birthday without fanfare. She assumed she'd make her own little cake, maybe a modest vanilla sponge, her personal favorite blow-out candles in the quiet kitchen. She even contemplated not bothering with the cake at all. It was just another day after all. She had no idea that something extraordinary was taking shape behind her back. Her 3 children, Robert, Henry, and Beatrice, were talking more frequently, conspiring, planning a surprise for the woman who had given them everything. They recognized that their mother's sacrifices had paved the way for their opportunities. Henry, especially, carried guilt because Elanor had sold her piano for Lily's surgery. He confided in Robert and Beatrice, confessing that every time he saw Lily laugh or play, he thought of how his mother had traded her passion for his daughter's future. They agreed that they needed to do something monumental for Eleanor's 70th. But what? The question loomed large, especially given their busy schedules and the geographical distance between them. The idea began with Henry suggesting they do something related to the old piano. If we could find her piano and buy it back, he proposed one night during a 3-way phone call with his siblings, that would be amazing, but who knows where it ended up. The collector who bought it had apparently moved to another state. Robert, the practical one, started investigating, calling old friends, searching online. Beatrice reached out to their family's network in the old town, trying to track down the collector's current location. After weeks of searching, they discovered that the collector had sold the piano years earlier to a musician overseas. That particular path was closed. Heartbroken but not discouraged, the siblings moved to Plan B. They scoured antique shops and websites looking for a piano of the same make and model, one close in age to the heirloom Elanor lost. It took them months of searching. Finally, Robert found an almost identical piano in a neighboring state. It had the same brand name, similar carvings, and the distinctive curved shape that Eleanor's old piano had. It was in terrible condition, chipped wood, missing strings, and a cracked soundboard, but the siblings saw beyond the flaws. They pooled their resources and purchased it. Next, they set to work finding someone who could restore it to its former glory. They discovered a retired piano restorer who worked out of a small workshop in a rural area. This man prided himself on reviving instruments others considered hopeless. He agreed to take on the project, intrigued by the siblings' story about their mother's sacrifice. Meanwhile, the siblings also wanted to do more than just restore a piano. They wanted to celebrate their mother's entire legacy, her dedication, her unwavering love, and her habit of giving even when she had little to offer. They considered various ideas: scholarships, donations, naming a local music room after her. Then they settled on something deeply personal: a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing education. They reasoned that no one knew better than Elanor the hardship of balancing work, family, and dreams. They wanted to ease that burden for at least a few single mothers who were determined to better their families' lives, just as Elanor had once done. They started a small crowdfunding campaign. To their surprise, word spread beyond just family and close friends. Neighbors who remembered Eleanor's kindness contributed. People who didn't even know Elanor but were touched by her story pitched in. Henry reached out to local media, who wrote a piece about this mother who had sold her piano to save her granddaughter. Donations trickled in from strangers inspired by the story. Meanwhile, the piano restoration was underway. Pieces had to be carefully disassembled. The restorer discovered the wood could be salvaged with meticulous sanding and refinishing, the strings replaced, and the broken keys repaired. It was a labor of love, time-consuming but deeply rewarding. Every week, the siblings would receive progress photos. Each picture showed the old hulk of an instrument slowly transforming into a gleaming, elegant piano reminiscent of the one Elanor had lost. During this time, Elanor carried on with her routine, oblivious to the surprises brewing around her. She continued her small acts of kindness in her community, making a pot of soup for a sick neighbor, crocheting hats for the newborns at the local hospital, or volunteering at the library's weekly book sale. She had no idea her children were orchestrating something that would bring back her long-lost music. As her birthday week approached, Robert contacted her. "Mom, I want you to pack a small bag," he said, trying to stifle the excitement in his voice. "We want to do something special for your birthday. We're going to pick you up in a few days." Elanor hesitated. She didn't want to impose on them or disrupt their routines, but Robert insisted, telling her that Henry and Beatrice would be joining as well. She relented, feeling both curious and a bit anxious. The night before her birthday, Henry's car arrived. He walked into her living room with a broad grin, telling her they had a whole weekend planned. He wouldn't say anything more, despite her repeated questions. When she asked if it was just going to be dinner somewhere, he just smiled. "Oh, Mom, you'll see." Early the next morning, all three siblings arrived at her doorstep. Beatrice had flown in from across the country. Robert gave her a warm hug, teasing her about how she still smelled like airplane peanuts, and they all laughed. Elanor felt a strange flutter in her chest, a sense of excitement and happiness she hadn't felt in years. She hopped into the car with them, noticing that her grandchildren were not present and wondering if they would meet them somewhere along the way. But again, her kids were tight-lipped, refusing to spoil the surprise. They drove out of the city and onto a winding country road. The landscape changed from suburban sprawl to wide-open fields, tall trees, and occasional glimpses of a sparkling lake through the foliage. Something about the place felt nostalgic to Elanor, but she couldn't pinpoint why. The car finally pulled up to a cozy cabin by the lakeside. The moment Elanor saw it, her heart lurched. This was the same lake where she had honeymooned with Martin all those decades ago. The cabin was much smaller than she remembered, but the familiar smell of pine trees and the sight of the rippling water brought memories flooding back. She felt tears welling up. "How did you find this place?" she asked in a shaky voice. "Dad and we spent our first week as husband and wife right here." Beatrice gently squeezed her mother's hand. "We did some digging, Mom. We wanted to bring you back to a place that mattered to both of you. We want to celebrate your birthday here, in the spot where all your dreams began." Elanor was stunned. She walked around the cabin, touching the aged wooden walls, remembering the laughter she once shared with Martin in that very spot. It was overwhelming to see how carefully her children had orchestrated this moment. She almost didn't notice Robert slip away, instructing the others to keep her occupied. As she stood on the small porch, gazing out over the lake, Henry asked if she recognized the little dock where she and Martin had once fished for hours, even though they never caught much. She nodded, tears trickling down her cheeks, marveling at how her children had reconnected her with a piece of her past she never thought she would see again. After allowing her some time to soak in the nostalgia, they ushered her back inside. The cabin was simple, furnished with just enough to be comfortable, a small kitchen area, a few chairs, a couch, and a large rug in the center of the living space. In the corner, draped with a large cloth, stood a mysterious object. Elanor hadn't even noticed it when she first walked in. Her eyes were drawn to the lake instead. Curiosity piqued, she approached it. Robert stood by with a camera, ready to capture the moment. Beatrice and Henry carefully lifted the cloth, revealing a gleaming wooden piano beneath. Elanor stared in disbelief, her mind initially refusing to comprehend what she was seeing. It was almost a mirror image of her old piano, the same style, the same gracefully curved legs, the same rich brown finish. Her eyes darted across its polished surface, noticing the details that so closely resembled the heirloom she'd lost. Only this time, everything was immaculate, restored to a glory her old piano hadn't seen in years. "We tried to track down your actual piano," Henry began softly, voice tight with emotion. "It was sold multiple times, and we just couldn't find it. But we found this. We paid someone to restore it, to make it as close as possible to the piano you loved." Eleanor's eyes brimmed with tears. She reached out, her hand trembling, to graze the smooth lid. In that moment, a rush of memories collided with the present. She remembered the countless lullabies played for her children, the romantic duets shared with Martin, the times her grandmother taught her to play simple folk tunes. She had lost it all the day she chose to save Lily's life. Now, somehow, music had found its way back. She opened the lid to see the ivory keys, each meticulously polished. The restorer had even carved a small inscription on the inside. For Elanor, whose love for her family knows no bounds. She read it with a trembling voice, every word echoing what she'd lived for. She sank into the piano bench, tears pouring freely now. Robert quietly took a step back, giving her space. Henry moved to her side, gently placing an arm around her shoulder. "Play something, Mom," Beatrice whispered, her own eyes wet. "We've never actually heard you play properly. Not since we were really young. We'd love to hear you play again." Elanor took a shaky breath, her fingers hovering over the keys. She felt apprehensive at first, worried she wouldn't remember how to form chords or that her arthritic fingers might betray her. But as she pressed down on that first note, a clear, warm sound filled the cabin. Her hands found their way, guided by muscle memory and the deep emotional connection she had to the piano. She began to play a gentle melodione Martin used to love, a piece she once practiced relentlessly as a teenager. The notes poured out, each one resonating in the wooden cabin. It was as though all her years of sacrifice, love, and longing were woven into that song. Her children listened, transfixed. They knew their mother was strong, hardworking, and loving, but seeing her become lost in the music revealed a side of her they had seldom witnessed. The melody shifted from softly tentative to full and vibrant. Elanor closed her eyes, letting the music guide her, tears sliding down her cheeks in a combination of sorrow and joy. When she played the final chord, the cabin fell silent, except for the soft sound of the lake lapping at the shore outside. Then Henry's daughter Lily stepped forward from a corner she had been quietly occupying, having snuck in with other family members while Elanor was playing. Lily, now a healthy teenager, held out a folder. "Grandma," she said, voice trembling with gratitude, "because of what you did for me, I'm here today. And now we want to give something back, something that honors you." She handed Elanor the folder. Inside were documents outlining a scholarship fund named the Elanor Grant Scholarship for Single Mothers. It detailed how it would award grants to women who were working or studying while raising children on their own. The document listed local businesses, neighbors, and even strangers who had contributed to make this a reality. Eleanor's eyes widened as she read each name, each donation, each heartfelt note of encouragement for the scholarship. She looked up at her children and granddaughter, speechless. She had never wanted recognition for what she did. She had only ever wanted her family to thrive. Yet here was tangible proof that her sacrifices had not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. Her family had taken her legacy and turned it into something that would help others who were in the same desperate situation she had once been in. Beatrice hugged her mother tight. "We know you never asked for anything, Mom. We know you'd give the shirt off your back for any of us. But we wanted you to see that your love has ripple effects, and we wanted others to benefit from that same love." Robert, Henry, and Lily joined in the embrace, tears shining in all their eyes. The weight of gratitude, love, and relief hung in the air. For a moment, they all stood there, arms around each other, hearts full. Then, slowly, laughter bubbled up. Someone cracked a joke about how they were all about to cry a lake that would overflow the one outside. The mood shifted into a buoyant joy, overshadowing the deep emotional moment. They spent the rest of the day celebrating. They cooked a small feast in the cabin's tiny kitchen: pasta, roasted vegetables, a homemade chocolate cake. They told stories about Martin, the father they lost too soon, and how proud he would be if he could see them all now. Neighbors, old friends, and extended family who had contributed to the scholarship or simply wanted to share the occasion arrived later that evening, each one greeting Elanor with warm hugs and heartfelt wishes. Some shared how they were moved by her story in the local news or the crowdfunding page. Many had their own personal tales of hardship and were inspired by Eleanor's example. And so, in that small lakeside cabin, which once witnessed the shy, hopeful love of a newlywed couple, a new chapter was written. Elanor, who had believed her best years were behind her, realized there was still so much love, joy, and purpose in her life. As night fell, they gathered around a bonfire by the lake. Marshmallows were roasted, laughter filled the cool air, and stories were exchanged about childhood antics, shared dreams, and the blessings of family. Elanor, wrapped in a warm blanket, leaned back in a wooden chair, looking at the firelight dancing on the faces of her children and grandchildren. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude not just for the piano or the scholarship, but for the reminder that love always comes full circle. Each of her children, in their own way, had taken the lessons she taught them: kindness, sacrifice, and generosity, and now reflected them back to her tenfold. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, illuminating the piano. Elanor woke early, slipping out of bed quietly. She made her way to the piano bench, carefully sitting down, a cup of tea in hand. Her joints ached slightly, but that didn't stop her from playing a soft, gentle tune. As the notes drifted through the cabin, she realized that this was the perfect symbol of her life. No matter how many times she had felt broken or dusty, no matter how chipped the paint of her dreams had become, she could still be restored. The love she poured into the world, into her children, into saving her granddaughter's life, had returned to her in the form of music and a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few days, they stayed together in that cabin, creating memories to replace the regrets of missed opportunities. There were fishing trips to the old dock, still no fish caught, but plenty of laughter. Henry taught Lily how to skip stones on the water's surface. Beatrice found some old photos of Elanor and Martin honeymooning there years ago and set them up on the mantle for everyone to see. Robert grilled dinner by the lake, joking that he was the worst cook of the siblings, and let them verify that fact for themselves. Even the neighbors dropped by occasionally, bringing fresh produce or baked goods. They sat for a while, listening to the story of how this had all come about: the initial idea, the hunt for the piano, the scholarship campaign, and they were uniformly impressed by the family's dedication. Everyone who met Elanor could see the unbreakable bond she shared with her children, forged in hardship and nurtured by love. On the final evening at the cabin, they held a small ceremony to officially announce the scholarship fund. They recorded a video message of Elanor speaking from her heart, addressing single mothers who might feel alone or overwhelmed. She encouraged them to keep going, to believe that sacrifice can lead to hope and change. She told them that love, in its truest form, is never wasted. Someone, somewhere, will carry it forward. And that, she said, was the lesson she had learned from life. They posted the video online, and it quickly gained traction, inviting supportive comments and additional donations. Eleanor's children promised to manage the fund, ensuring that future recipients got the help they needed to chase their dreams while caring for their children. When it was time to leave, Elanor walked through the cabin, running her fingers over the walls one last time. She took a moment to stand by the window where she and Martin once watched the sunrise decades ago. That memory felt like a sweet echo. She wasn't sad to leave, though. She felt a profound sense of peace. Martin's spirit, she believed, was alive in the love that surrounded her. On the ride back, the children revealed another surprise. They had arranged for the newly restored piano to be delivered to Eleanor's house the next day. They joked that she might need to clear some space in the living room, which was no longer occupied by that old empty spot. She laughed, tears springing to her eyes, thinking about how the piano would once again fill her home with the music she thought she'd lost forever. In the following weeks, Eleanor's life took on a different hue. She had a reason to wake up each day with anticipation. She practiced the piano regularly, finding that while her fingers weren't as nimble as they once were, she could still coax out melodies that soothed her soul. She received updates about the scholarship, learning how single mothers were applying, sharing their stories of perseverance, and expressing gratitude. Some even wrote letters thanking Miss Elanor, saying her story inspired them not to give up. Her home became a gathering place once again. Her grandchildren visited more often, some wanting to learn piano from her. She taught them the same lullabies she once played for their parents, laughing whenever they hit the wrong notes or got frustrated. She assured them that mistakes were part of learning and that the real joy was in playing from the heart. Occasionally, neighbors would drop by just to say hello and chat about the remarkable transformation in her life. They marveled at her resilience, her kindness, and the unwavering devotion of her children. A local newspaper even wrote a follow-up article about how the entire project was a testament to the power of family and community. As her 70th year progressed, Elanor felt younger, lighter. The loneliness that once haunted her had been replaced by the comforting knowledge that she was surrounded by love she had sown through countless small acts of selflessness. She realized she was living proof that kindness, in its truest form, always finds a way back. And even though Martin was no longer physically present, she felt his presence in every chord she played on that piano, as if he were quietly humming along in the next room. One day, as she was flipping through the mail, she found a card from a young mother who had received the scholarship. The woman wrote about how she was working 2 jobs while studying part-time, trying to raise her baby girl alone. She wrote, "I didn't think anyone would ever notice my struggle or care. But then I found out about the scholarship, and suddenly, I felt a whole community rooting for me. I felt like I could stand a little taller. Thank you, Miss Elanor, for reminding me that hope is real and that I'm not alone." Tears formed in Eleanor's eyes. She clutched the card to her chest and walked over to the piano, pressing a few gentle keys. In that moment, she thought of all the sacrifices she had made, the late-night shifts, the missed holidays, the sale of her beloved heirloom. Somehow, it all led to Thesa's circle of compassion, far greater than she had ever expected. Her family's gesture wasn't just an act of gratitude. It was a promise to carry forward her legacy of love. She closed her eyes, played a soft tune, and whispered, "Thank you to the universe, to Martin, to her children, to everyone who had taught her that no act of love is ever wasted." And that is how Elanor, who once believed her best years were behind her, discovered a renewed sense of purpose and joy in the 7th decade of her life. Her story stands as a testament to the power of family, the endurance of love, and the quiet miracles that happen when a sacrifice is made in the name of something greater than oneself. So, if you're still here, touched by her story, remember that every small kindness can echo across years, and every sacrifice made with love can inspire others to shine a light in someone else's darkness. Thank you once again for watching. Don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if you love your family, subscribe to this channel, help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and join our mission of sharing stories that remind us all just how powerful love can be. Because in the end, as Elanor discovered, kindness always comes full circle.